We'll wait around
Hi.
2 minutes for more people to come, and then we can start. So yeah.
Okay, I think we can start now. Anuva, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, all right. Hold on. Thank you so much for coming. We're really excited to start, and today we'll be talking about paying for your college journey. So before we begin, we're going to be sharing a lot of resources with you today, as well as links to useful scholarships that you can apply to. So we want to make sure that you have all those resources even after this call. So we've actually posted these sites along with additional resources on our website, and I'm just going to drop that in the chat now. So if you go there, it's really easy to sign up, and it's free, and you can, from there, you can just see all of the material that we're covering today. We'll also be posting a recording of this there, and as well as a list of additional resources. So I'll give everyone just a few minutes to do that. You can also follow along as these slides are in that website as we're going. So I'll give everyone a few minutes just to sign up, and feel free, like when you're done, just write in the chat that you've done it and that we can keep going.
And if you have any questions during the presentation, don't be scared to ask. We'll try our best to answer them.
Yeah, so just put it in the chat when you have finished. And that way we'll know when to start.
For people who have just joined, right now there's a link posted in the chat. Anuva, you might want to send it again. And just go ahead and create an account on that website. You can follow along the presentation there.
Yeah, we'll be sharing a lot of resources, scholarship websites, etc., that you might want to keep handy even after the slideshow. So yes, worth having.
I think we can go ahead and start, Annie.
Yeah, let's start. Okay, so before we even think about the topic of financial aid and paying for college, it's really important to understand the cost of college. What exactly are your expenses and what are your fees? And what do you exactly need to cover every single year for 4 years of university, or if you choose another alternative path? So, the cost of college includes three core components, including your tuition, your room, and your board. Your tuition is the meat of your bill, is the price of your classes at an educational institution that you choose to go to, and your tuition is primarily relied on your status as a student and the institution you will be attending. So, for example, are you attending a public or a private school? Are you an in state or an out of state student? These variables are really important when deciding the cost of college because they can make or break, and they can be a very important factor in you deciding to take out loans or any of the sort for that. Your tuition is charged often per course credit in college. Secondly, your room is essentially your living expenses and it's the price of dorming or living on campus at a university if you choose not to live with your family or if your family simply does not live near your university. Rooming is typically a requirement for freshmen and sophomores at some schools, though juniors and seniors do have a choice to live off campus at some universities. Living on campus can be costly, but it's important to note that living off campus isn't exactly inexpensive as most people would think, because living off campus still has you still need to consider costs like security deposits and rent costs and even grocery shopping. So yes, choose wisely for rooming. The last factor of the cost of college that you would really want to consider is the board, or essentially your food budget, so to say. Um, at a university, you need to decide, are you going to be paying an unlimited meal card or do you want prepaid meals? If you live off campus, are you going to be doing grocery shopping and what are your monthly, weekly expenses for that? In addition, it's also really important to consider the viability of transportation, bus tickets, bus passes, etc. Some additional costs of attendance besides the three that we talked about, which was tuition, room, and board, are the cost of textbooks. Textbooks can be very expensive, and so it's really important to coordinate your expenses accordingly, as well as everyday school supplies, transportation, like I mentioned, miscellaneous expenses if you want to have some kind of comfort money or extra spending money on you at all times, grocery shopping, as mentioned, as well as any reasonable costs for study abroad programs that you may consider for your respective field of study. It's also important to note that the amount of expenses you have stored away for each category of your college costs is also greatly influenced by the city you live in as well. For example, New York is very notorious for an expensive price of living, and so grocery shopping, if you're off campus, may be an issue. So yeah, this is a cost breakdown of an undergraduate tuition and fees of an incoming freshman at Carnegie Mellon University, a private university in Pennsylvania. So as you can see, this person or this incoming freshman's costs are broken down into tuition, fees, room and dining, books, transportation, etc. And as you can see, a resident or an on-campus in dorm is 77K, and a commuter or an off-campus renting student will be paying 65K. It's really important to know all these factors when deciding your living situation as well. Okay, so now we're on to the different types of schools that you can be going to. So we have broken this down into four pathways that you could be taking in your academic journey. So the first in the list is a public 2-year in-district school, or commonly known as community college. As you can tell by this table, community college tuition is significantly cheaper than private or public educational institutions at $3,000 for tuition. This is because community colleges are publicly subsidized. So first of all, there is no big campus infrastructure and there are limited facilities. Most community colleges can offer associate degree programs that you can typically complete in 2 years or less. Some people may choose to go to community college because they want a financial safety net, or they want to avoid student debt, or they don't want to draw any student loans. So it all depends on your financial situation and what you're looking for in a degree, essentially. So some examples of this are De Anza College and Foothill College. The second route that you can take is a public four-year university. These universities generally offer programs that result in bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees that take longer to complete, so usually 4+ years. These universities typically have a much larger range of program options you can choose from, and sometimes even have smaller colleges within them. So, for example, UCSD, University of California, San Diego, is split into 7 learning track colleges, such as John Muir College, Six College, etc. And UC Berkeley comprises of the College of Business, College of Engineering, etc. The third option you can take are public 4-year out-of-state schools. So a really important thing to keep in mind if you want to go out of state is that by this out-of-state students pay so much more than in-state students. And this is because an out-of-state applicant does not pay taxes to the state in which the university is located. Therefore, these lower tuition costs are essentially the state's way of rewarding its residents for their financial contributions and also accounting for the tax dollars that they've already paid to support the state school. So some examples are the University of Michigan, where in-state tuition is $15K, but out-of-state tuition is $49K. Finally, you can choose to also go to a private 4-year institution. These institutions, at these institutions, everyone pays the same amount of tuition fees, regardless of whether or not you're an in-state or out-of-state applicant. This is because private universities do not receive state subsidies or any kind of money from the government to fund the institution. So therefore, their operations are mainly funded through 1, tuition and 2, donors. So some examples would be CMU, like mentioned, Stanford, big names, big name Ivies, yeah.
All right. So you might be looking at those numbers there and feeling quite intimidated. I know I was when I was going through the college application and financial aid process. But the good thing to know is that there is financial aid that you can receive to help fund your college journey. So the most important step that you must complete in order to receive financial aid is the free application for federal student aid, also known as the FAFSA. And the FAFSA determines your eligibility not only for federal student aid, but also for state-based aid and scholarships. Essentially, the FAFSA is a form that you would fill out with your parents and include your financial information. And based on this, the government determines what type of aid you would be eligible for. Now, the FAFSA actually opens as early as October 1st, and the deadline is by June 30th. However, you'll want to check your individual school and states because each has their own deadline. So for example, the school I'm going to in the fall, its deadline was November 15th for the FAFSA. So my advice is to make sure you check those deadlines and try to fill it out as soon as possible. Some people also wonder, what if I don't think I will qualify for aid? Well, you should always try because you might and you never know. And also, even schools that offer merit-based aid, they often require you to still fill out the FAFSA. So bottom line, make sure to fill this out. So we just had a question in the chat, is tuition paid yearly or in monthly installments? So usually it's paid yearly. It can vary based in colleges. So there's a few colleges that might also have you do like by semester. And often like tuition for some colleges, it's like going to be the same no matter how many classes you take in a semester. So that's how my school works. But there are some schools that also are based on credits. So the number of classes you take contributes to how much you pay. So you'll probably want to check with your individual school to figure that out. All right, so let me know if that answered your question. If you have others, feel free to drop it in the chat. So tips for the FAFSA. The FAFSA, like I said before, asks you about your finances, so it can be really helpful to have some of information handy. And like I mentioned before, it's useful to often do this with your parents because it requires things like federal tax information or tax returns, records of untaxed income, cash, savings, investments, etc. And you can technically fill this out manually and send it in through the mail. But what I would recommend is using the My Student Aid app. I use that, and it is provided by the same organization that makes FAFSA, and it walks you through the process and offers useful tips. And last thing to recognize is there's more details related to the FAFSA that we won't have time to get into, but there's a ton of resources on filling it out online. So if you just type FAFSA and Google it. There's a website all about filling out blogs, videos. So try to look into those, and they'll definitely help you. All right. So the second thing, in addition to the FAFSA, is the CSS Profile. The CSS Profile is a supplement to the FAFSA, so it's important to realize it's not replacing the FAFSA, it's just a supplement. Whereas the FAFSA gives you access to federal-based aid, the CSS Profile is an additional application for non-federal aid. In other words, institutional-based aid. And this means that the college or university is providing you with money for your college. And this also opens up around the same time as the FAFSA in October. And again, the deadlines usually vary by college. There's a few schools that don't require this, but most do. Pretty much any college you can think of probably requires a CSS Profile. So those two, FAFSA and CSS, are kind of the start to determine your eligibility for financial aid.
Okay, now we'll talk about some statistics you'll want to know. We already talked about the cost of attendance earlier with Annie, so now we're going to talk about expected family contribution. So basically, your expected family contribution, or EFC, is an index number that college financial staff use to determine how much financial aid you will actually receive when you attend their school. So the information you report on your FAFSA form is used to calculate your EFC, which is why the FAFSA is so important. So make sure you fill that out. The EFC is calculated according to a formula that includes factors like income, assets, benefits, and your family size. And right here, there is a link to the whole EFC formula guide, which is very complicated, and we're not going to get that deep into it today, but you can always ask us questions about it, and we will try to help you. And another thing about your EFC is the higher that this number is, the less federal financial aid you will receive, because theoretically, if your EFC is higher, your family is able to pay off more of your college tuition.
Yeah, so how exactly do you pay for all of this? There are four main types of financial aid: grants, scholarships, work study, and federal or private loans. But before that, let's dive into the types of financial aid. And by that, I mean need-based versus merit-based financial aid. Need-based aid is determined by a family's demonstrated ability to pay for college as calculated by the FAFSA, and it doesn't take into account how skilled you are. It only accounts for how needy you are. Merit aid, on the other hand, can be awarded by an institution, college, or private organization to a student for a specific talent or athletic or academic ability. An example of a merit-based aid is the Regents Scholarship at UC Berkeley. So let's talk about federal grants. Federal grants are scholarships given out by the government that do not need to be repaid. An example of this is the Pell Grant. The eligibility for the Pell Grant is based on a family's expected contribution, or EFC, and is calculated on the FAFSA. In other words, the Pell Grant is need-based aid. And make sure to check with the State Department of Education to see all the federal grants available to you.
So yeah, after considering grants, you may also definitely want to apply for scholarships. Scholarships are financial aid awards issued by the government to help you pay for your undergraduate degree. So a very simple way to put it is that it's free money or gifts from the government. You don't need to pay this money back in your future endeavors, unlike student loans, for example. However, it's really important that not all scholarships are free money, so to speak, and some of them do have certain strings attached. For example, if you're on an athletic scholarship, then you may have to maintain a certain GPA, certain performance, etc., depending on your university requirements. Scholarships can come from many different sources and not just the government itself. They can come from corporations, organizations, high schools, and even online websites and universities themselves. It's really important to do some research on the scholarships that your universities offer as well to make sure you can get as much aid as possible and pay off your college fees. So let's go over the types of scholarships that there are. A common misconception among students and youth is that scholarships are only awarded for academic achievements or straight A's, your GPA, and your PSAT score. But merit scholarships or academic achievement scholarships are only one kind of scholarships out, only one of the many kinds of scholarships out there. So yes, merit scholarships, as mentioned, are just academically based, and some schools even provide a free ride for this. So by free ride, it means that the college will cover all the tuition costs for 4 years of your college degree, so to speak. So, for example, Indiana Bloomington awards the Wells Scholarship, and this pays the full ride for 4 years attending the undergraduate school. The second kind of scholarship that you could receive is from community service. So, for example, the AXA Achievement Scholarship Award awards 2,500, 10,000, and 25,000 to US students who give back to their community. You can also receive scholarships for athletic achievement, as mentioned before, and for unique hobbies. So this is a really unique one because it's not something that most people would think of when applying for scholarships, but you can actually get scholarships for very weird activities and hobbies that you do. For example, Stuck at Prom Scholarship Contest awards scholarships up to 10K for students who can make the best prom dress out of duct tape. There's a lot of weird scholarships out there, and so you definitely do want to look around through your online resources and see what you can apply towards. And finally, there's also demonstrated financial need or need-based scholarships, as Mohit mentioned. Anuba, do you want to talk more about scholarships?
Yeah, sure. So just to put this in perspective, so I'm an incoming freshman, and when I was going through this process, there were a lot of scholarships available. And like Annie said, there's many different types, not just merit-based. So for me, USC, for example, offers, that one is merit-based, but they offer like half tuition off. That's one that is interesting and definitely good to look into. But then there's also totally different types of scholarships. So there was one called the Silicon Valley Realtors Scholarship, and it was basically a group of realtors in Silicon Valley that were literally giving a scholarship to students who would just apply with their resume. So there's a lot of different types of scholarships, whether that be athletic or hobbies or drawings or whatever it might be. So definitely don't underestimate this. I had a friend who I know who paid a ton of her tuition just in the form of scholarships. So do try to look into those. And I know college apps can be kind of a lot of work, but the good thing to know is that sometimes you can just use what you already made for those college apps to apply for scholarships as well. So definitely do try to look into it.
So yes, continuing on scholarships, here are just some websites that you can use to browse for scholarships that you may need to apply for. So these websites all have compiled resources that can help you guide your financial decision making. So for example, some of them teach you how to fill the FAFSA and other really important necessities like that. So yeah, signing up for these websites, some of them also can offer targeted and personalized scholarships to you based on I suppose, the profile you fill out and your interests, demonstrated interests. So you definitely want to make the best use out of your online public access resource hubs as possible, and definitely look around to see what you can apply for.
All right. There's a few more questions in the chat. So we'll try to reply to those now, and if not, we'll also reply once we get through the slides. But just hold on and we'll reply to you in the chat. Thanks for asking the question. Okay, so the next thing we'll be talking about is work study. So work study is basically the idea of having a part-time job while you're studying to repay loan debt. So we'll be talking about student loans in the next slide, but what happens is that once you take a student loan, at some point you have to repay that debt. And often the longer you wait, the more it accrues in interest and the larger and larger it becomes. So it can be super, super helpful to try work study to help pay it off as you're in college. And work study, often the opportunities will be given through your college. So for example, my college, they had a webinar the other day where they were talking about work study, and it happens in a lot of different forms. So one example is more intense, like for example, a research assistant or a teacher assistant, where you're often working quite a bit, 10, 15 hours a week, but then it can also happen in other ways, like there was one they mentioned about a desk job at the library where you check students in, and that's much more low key, and you can, people joke you can even do homework while you're at it. So, there's a lot of different potential forms of work study, and you can definitely look into that at your school. And as it said here, it's connected to your FAFSA. So essentially, if you are eligible for financial aid, they'll tell you in your financial aid package, which often comes out around the same time that your decision comes out, whether you've qualified for work study. And then based on that, you can look into that.
All right, so student loans. Student loans are another way of receiving financial aid, and they're basically considered an investment in your future. You'll borrow money to pay for like college, for example, and then you can pay it back later with some added interest. When you take a federal student loans, it's basically just a loan from the government with a fixed interest rate. So you can take this loan to get whatever money you need to pay for college, but then you also have the responsibility of paying back your loan. So there are two main types of loans that undergraduate students can take, and subsidized and unsubsidized loans. And these loans each have their own qualifications and responsibilities. So the main difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans is who pays the interest. With a subsidized loan, all you are responsible for repaying is the principal, just the money that you borrow, and the government will pay back the interest for you. With an unsubsidized loan, interest will begin accumulating as soon as you take the loan, and then you have to pay back both the principal and the interest by yourself. Both subsidized and unsubsidized loans have a limit of like how much money you can borrow, though the limit for a subsidized loan is lower. So like you can borrow more money with an unsubsidized loan. And with a subsidized loan, there is also a limit on the maximum amount of time you can receive aid in this way. And this is usually measured in like school years.
Yeah, and just something to keep in mind with loans, you want to be a bit careful with them because you do eventually have to pay them off. And so we would highly recommend that you do try to look into the other options like scholarships, federal aid, work study. And, oftentimes you do have to take out a loan, sometimes it's just, there's no other option, and that's okay. Just do try to pay it off as soon as possible, whether that means working a job or talking with the people at your college to figure out what that means for you.
Yeah. So when will you know when you received financial aid? You'll get this information in what is like a financial aid award letter, and these will usually arrive in late March or early April, which is at the same time or a few days after your college will send out its acceptance letter. So you can definitely look into this. It'll vary from college to college. So yeah, it's good to have a good idea of when your financial aid letter is going to arrive.
Yeah, and
I hope this workshop was informational and that you'll continue using Koin in the future. Just a reminder that this slideshow is up on our web on koinedu.us if you want to refer to it and like click on the links or something like that. And good luck to everyone who is applying for college or financial aid. And if you're not, still good luck in all of your other future endeavors.
Yeah, and one other thing to mention is that I know things are pretty crazy this year with COVID going on. So you can actually reach out to the financial aid office at your school if your situation changes. I know a lot of students and friends who had to do that this year. And also sometimes you can kind of you can actually resubmit the FAFSA every year. And if your financial aid situation changes, then they'll often also try to change the package for you as well. Yeah, and for anybody who came in late, we'll be posting a recording of this session on the website, and I'll just put that website in the chat again. Also, all the resources and links that we shared in this presentation are also on that website, so feel free to go there. It's very easy to make an account. It's completely free. Now we'll be having a mini Q&A session, so if you have any questions, I see some already coming in through the chat, or if you want to say out loud, feel free.
Yeah, I believe there were some questions earlier in the presentation if we want to go back a little bit and start answering them as they go down.
Yeah, so one that I see is, would universities going online lower the cost? So that's a great question. So this year, there are some, first of all, if you are going online, you don't have to pay room and board. So if you remember when we had those 3 categories, tuition, room and board, and those 3 categories, you wouldn't pay room and board if you are going online. So that would save you money. There's also a few universities who are reducing the costs because it's online. So you would probably have to check based on your school. But yeah, definitely because of COVID and all of this, things are kind of all changing.
Yeah, so definitely make sure to check which college, because Harvard is actually not reducing tuition costs. Their tuition cost for the 2020-21 academic year has been confirmed as around $52K per year. So definitely make sure to check.
Yeah,
each college.
I know Princeton, on the other hand, is lowering their tuition, so it really depends. You want to just check and see.
I think there's a question about, I think it was, will affirmative action affect college tuition? And I'm not completely sure about it, but affirmative action mainly applies to college admissions and does not really affect the amount you have to pay for college. But again, I'm not so sure about that one, but I will look into it and get back to you with an answer if you still have that question later on.
Yeah, in a lot of colleges, they have like the financial aid office separate from the admissions office. So usually, I think affirmative action is more applied to admissions. But yeah, I too am not totally sure. Those are kind of waters that I'm not totally familiar with, but we can all look into that if you're still interested.
Yep. Does anyone have any more questions?
So somebody else asked, does having other siblings going to college affect my FAFSA? So yes, they'll ask you about your siblings, how old they are, whether they're in college, things like that. And oftentimes, if your siblings are in college, that may make you eligible for more financial aid because they know that, the family is already paying so much for somebody else as well. There's also a question here about income grants. What am I saying? Income brackets and grants. And if you make below or above a certain income bracket, you would pay a certain amount of tuition. And is this guaranteed? So usually the way it works is the FAFSA will take into account your income brackets as one of the data points, or which income bracket you fall into. that is definitely a major data point that they look at, and they'll also look at other things like we mentioned, siblings, or your tax returns, whatever it might be. And based on that, they will kind of tell you how much you're eligible for. And something that I would really recommend checking out is the net price calculator. So you can go online, and every college has its own net price calculator. And I believe there's also one offered by the government. And it's pretty simple to fill out, and it kind of gives you a good idea of how much financial aid you would receive, almost like doing the whole FAFSA process, but super quick for yourself. And sometimes it'll vary a little bit, but it's usually a pretty good estimate. So if you want to kind of see how much money you think you would receive from the government, that might be something to look into, or also from the school. And yes, it's recommended to fill out both the FAFSA and the CSS profile, because the FAFSA will help you with federal aid, CSS with non-federal aid, and most colleges do require both. Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for coming. You asked a lot of great questions, everyone.
Yeah, no problem. Does anyone else have any questions? You can type it in chat, or you can unmute yourself. Anything's fine.
If everyone doesn't have any more questions, I guess this is the end of our workshop. Thanks for coming, everyone. You guys were all great listeners and asked great questions. Thank you so much. And I hope you guys learned a lot about paying for your own college. And if you guys have any questions, just reach out to us. We have an Instagram and an email. I can type that in the chat, yes.
Yeah, and we might also be hosting more events in the future. So keep checking, the Instagram and the website. We're planning to maybe also post future events there as well.
Yeah. So we want to thank you for your time, and we really appreciate everyone for coming out and listening to us today. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.